Eternal glory awaits me in the Hall of Bones. I shall always win, in victory or in death.
The world of Runeterra was shrouded in chaos. The old great Empire of Shurima that had ruled for centuries under the might of the sun disk has fallen. Its great golden god warriors fell into their ambitions, whilst others of their kind descended into madness, consumed by corrupting powers beyond the reaches of mortals, turning them into living weapons. The taint of the void on these warriors' minds, and the newly found mastery of the blood magic of a dark prince had made these beings rule across the world. These were no longer warriors, but harbingers of death and destruction to future civilizations. These harbingers would be known as the Darken. It was only then the celestial gods with the aspect of twilight named Maisha sealed away these forsaken beings, leaving only their corrupted weapons to slowly be lost to time. Remnants of this war, which had been named by the chroniclers and lore keepers as the Darken War, have survived due to common cooperations to revive their lost cities, while others saw the opportunities to conquer and gain strength of their own. Before the founding of the great empire of what we would call Noxus, around 500 years before, the human civilization in the continent of Valoran was anything but prosperous, let alone unified. Many of these human tribes fought amongst themselves over who held the strength and who held the strongest might. The fall of the Shuriman Empire and the Darken left its former subjects scattered, leaderless, and ambitious. Amongst these many tribes, a man, a tribal leader, driven by a great belief of becoming a great conqueror. A man emboldened by the desire to become a god in his new lifetime, to serve his gods that has bestowed upon him of what he calls the first truth, and to dine within a great hall of bones. Sun Uzal, driven by these ambitions in a mighty philosophical zealotous belief, rampaged across the lands, leading his army to trample across lesser tribes. Many had no desire to go against Sun Uzal, and had decided to march under his banner. As for those who resisted, many had their blood soaked on the battlefield in the face of his merciless slaughter. For he saw nothing but conquer in pursuit of eternal glory. Even amongst his fanatical great army, he did not see them as men. He saw warriors merely as pawns, like pawns on a chessboard. They were nothing but pieces to be used for his goals, for he would be known amongst his subjects and his enemies as the unconquered king. There was, however, a great general amongst the ranks of his grand army, formidable in his strength and equally as cruel. Katashli was a fine warrior in the army of his lord, and Sun Uzal found amusement in that. But he still saw him as nothing but another pawn whose loyalty was correctly in place. Sun Uzal's violent rampage across the lands had brought countless to their knees, or to their early graves. And with more violence came more violence. In the lands where it has seen nothing but bloodshed, Its cries of anguish had awakened and called a demonic presence that had lingered in the realm of spirits and shadows. But with an endless sense of violence and slaughter, the bringer of ruin, a demon of Runeterra, has come. When Sun Uzal and Katashli lay to rest in their encampment, over their spare hours of playing cards, they suddenly came under attack from that particular demon that had been awoken. Enthralled by the thirst of battle, the primordial shadow of ruin, Atakan, has come. The unexpected assault saw Katashli defend his lord. Still, he was only human, and he met his end. Sun Uzal, a man who was not one for any form of sentiment, would fell the demon from his mace. As for his army's general, he would not let such a valuable life go to waste. It means for him to see his great conquering come to fruition, for again, he never saw a friend, but a valuable piece on the board. It was henceforth, after dragging the limped corpses of both the fallen demon and fallen general, the mages in Sun Uzal's services had brought in the use of old arcane scrolls which had been claimed through his conquest, used their powers and bounded the spirit and the soul of the demon and the fallen general together. It was then both the demon Atakan and the Grand General Katashli were united to one monstrous body, where its existence was bounded in servitude of the unconquered king, with the powers of horrific violence bound to the will of the fallen general. The demon Atakan, under the control of Sun Uzal, has hastened the conquest, where the demon of shadow, violence, and ruin served him dutifully. With the assistance and servitude of the great demon, Sun Uzal would pass and fall to his first death, for the benevolence of time would not make exceptions even to a soul who has grasped countless victories. When Sun Uzal's rule came to an end, he believed that he would be worthy to dine with the gods within the Hall of Bones, a palace, he believed, where he would be welcome upon his death, and to finally learn what he called the final truth. But yet, once his soul left mortality, he soon came to realize that the final truth was empty. There were no gods, no grand hall of bones, and no eternal glory. His soul raged from the revelation. The souls of the damned wailed around him in the vast emptiness of the underworld. His rage would soon become strong enough for his soul to overpower the wailing, ghastly beings, and Sun Uzal himself would soon become powerful to bend the dead to his will, and in turn bend the will of the underworld itself, to help then become its own kingdom, the kingdom that he so desired, but was never there, the kingdom that he believed, but was taken. As centuries passed, the rule of Sun Uzal in the world of mortals would turn into stories amongst legends. However, for Sun Uzal himself, his rule still continued, only this time within the vastness of the underworld. His new kingdom built by the bricks of souls, populated by the debts of the old and the fallen. The power of the dead has now become his new conquered rule. This would only further his drive for his new plans. Return to the world of the living and rule once more. Only this time, his rule shall be eternal. From the depths of the underworld, his whispers would pierce through the minds of powerful mages, sorcerers to be particular, in the kingdom of Noxus, the old kingdom he brought upon his first conquests. These sorcerers heard and listened to his whispers, to construct him a giant suit of armor, where his soul shall be bound, and bring him back to the mortal world. At first, the sorcerers who had heard his whispers thought that if they were to fulfill this favor, they believed that it would allow them to control the unyielding powers of the fallen. But as quickly as they summoned his return, they were all deceived, for their binding spells had no effect.
Once I suffered a mortal body. Now I am Iron Incarnate.
Once the soul of the unconquered king was bound to the giant armor. His otherworldly powers as the god of the underworld were proven to be the sentence of death of the mortal world.
The world has tried to forget my existence. Time to remind them why they fear.
The old title of unconquered king, even the old name Sun Uzal, would be tossed aside and inscribed in the pages of history. For this is the new beginning of a chapter in Noxian history. And, in the dark language of the dead, he would say his name. Mordekaiser, the Iron Revenant, has come, and his grasp of death shall rule both worlds. As he gazed upon those who had summoned his soul to his return, the iron gauntlets of his armor would begin to move. And, in many violent motions, those who had summoned him, and who foolishly tried to control him, were slain. From these fallen sorcerers, Mordekaiser would forge himself a new, yet familiar, weapon, a giant mace, now made up of iron, steel, and the souls of the dead. A weapon that would become so destructive that its name shall be made into legend. Nightfall. Now empowered by necromantic energy, Mordekaiser would raise his old fallen soldiers from the dead and bind them under his command to begin his second conquest. And amongst these fallen soldiers was the old demon that he had used to bring ruin in the days of his first conquest. The demon Atakon, also known as the Bringer of Ruin, had wandered through the lands ever since the old unconquered king had passed. But now that his old master has returned, the Iron Revenant's command became absolute once more. For his spirit was bound once more. Mordekaiser's advance through the old continent of Valoran, where he sought chaos and destruction, violence amass, and fires rage through the path of the old war of his former life. As he pursued his eternal rule, much like before, the raging fires and chaos called upon a demonic presence, a demon of raging flames. Tybalk, a fiery demon, had emerged in the wake of Mordekaiser's path of destruction. To the Iron Revenant, however, the demon was now a new tool to be used alongside his old. He would bind the spirit of the fiery demon to his will, and he, now, along with his bringer of ruin, he wields his new raging flames of Tybalk, bringing the final reign to its peak. Now, his eternal names, Iron Revenant, the Lord and Conqueror of the Death, the Demon's Bane, the Tyrant of the Great Grass Ocean, and the first King of Noxus, now forever truly eternal. His armies of shadows, death, and fires forged an empire that lasted for generations, bringing untold death and destruction, where at its center rose the immortal Bastion, the grand symbol of Mordekaiser's vast empire. For over 4 centuries, the tyrannical reign may have brought a great empire, but what it had also brought, yet unaccounted for under the tyrant's vision, was an opportunity. An opportunity for those to seize the empire for themselves. Through this time, the tyrannical rule made the empire's inhabitants doubtful, with many of these barbarians aligning themselves with many like-minded others, leading a large portion of them to worship a dark prince. No, the dark prince of blood magic, Lord Vladimir, that had been taken by the Darkin all those centuries ago, haunting the coastal cliffs of eastern Valoran. Many of his subjects worshipped his fiendish being as a god, who demanded the sacrifices of the youth from the Noxai tribes that prayed to him as their barbarian god. Vladimir's lair, as hidden it may be, was as grand as any manor, though besides his cult followers, very few are welcome to his residence, unless they wish to offer another sacrifice, of course. Then, in one loathsome day, a pale mage who introduced herself as LeBlanc came to Vladimir's lair and gave him an offer seemingly too good to refuse. And the mythic and bloodthirsty fiend opened the doors and welcomed LeBlanc into his manor. Once inside, the two mages dined and feasted as equals in the dining room, and both began to weave magic so dark that the wine at their table turned sour, and the roses withered, vibrant red turning to black. But whatever specific words were spoken at the table remains shrouded in mystery. From what is now known, this feast would become the founding of the Black Rose. Between the partnership of LeBlanc and Vladimir, the Noxai tribes rallied under the servitude of their barbarian god and their new co-leader LeBlanc, and began their march against Mordekaiser, with Vladimir leading the siege from the front gates of the immortal Bastion. In the heat of battle, the two demons Otacon and Tybalk fought against Vladimir, but their fury would unfortunately not be enough. For from the weaving of the hands of the Lord, the new dark blood magic sprouted magical binding chains, sealing away the Revenant's two weapons he had used in his lives. With the gaze of the Iron Revenant distracted in defending his fortress, LeBlanc ventured deep below the deepest chambers of the Bastion, where she soon found the source of her former master's dark power, the well of death that fueled his empire with the powers of the underworld. As the siege raged on, it was only inevitable that it would see the Iron Revenant clash with the two powerful mages. Unrelenting, unyielding, unimaginable arcane magic ripped through the very surface on where the three stood. Until LeBlanc and Vladimir, with their combined powers of dark and blood, cast Mordekaiser from the material realm by severing the anchors of his soul from his armor, and banish the armies and powers of the dead along with him. The Noxai were victorious. Victory was sweet for the Black Rose. The Noxai tribes then laid their claim to the immortal bastion. As the new dominant tribesmen bask in their glorious victory, unbeknownst to them, remnants of Mordekaiser's magic still lingered, either to avoid any further chaos, or perhaps something more sinister. LeBlanc seized her old master's dark arcane secrets for herself, for reasons that could only be up to conspiracies and speculation. LeBlanc would suddenly vanish from this chapter in Noxian history. Outside of the Pale Sorceress's deception, Vladimir and the Noxai tribes have now become the new dominant power in the continent. Yet, they remained divided. This victory would, however, be short-lived, for in a distant land further to the east, a realm responsible for gathering and protecting the most dangerous knowledge and artifacts in the world fell into ruination. This left the dangerous knowledge of Runeterra unsafe and unguarded, to then fall into the wrong hands. The knowledge of the most powerful ancient artifacts, the World Runes, was now known by the new nations of Valoran, where tensions of distrust and paranoia for fear of being unwittingly destroyed by these runes. Leaders of two rival Noxai tribes pled with a mage named Tyrus in a parley at the village of Calm. The encounter ended in the destruction of Calm and the surrounding territories by the power of two world runes, thus beginning another apocalyptic war, the Rune Wars. The divided tribal nations began to destroy themselves with the runes, annihilating each other of their perceived enemies in an instant, leaving only ashes, ruins, and powerful storms of pure, uncontrollable arcane magic. Left with no other choice, Vladimir and the last of the Noxai tribes were forced to retreat inside the immortal bastion from the magical fallout, and would remain inside the powerful fortress, all in the hopes of their survival.
History forgets, but the Black Rose remembers.